Okay, so hi everyone. We are at our second reading of the Theaetetus. And without further ado, I would like to ask someone willing to give us a short summary of what we discussed at the first session.
I doubt that I could summarize everything, but as I said, I've spent part of the morning watching last week. So the one that I introduced a minute ago was a strong in terms of where we are in the reading. Socrates has just gone through introducing the concept, an analogical concept, if you like, of midwifery, and suggesting that he himself was more of a midwife. You know, he's somebody who asks questions but doesn't give answers. And he makes reference to a couple of other writers of the time. One of the reasons he doesn't give too many answers is because they're often wrong answers or whatever. And he's talking about the development of the young mind, and that his midwifery is designed, if you like, to produce better men, better philosophical men, if you like, by virtue of the questions that he asks, and in so doing, directing the thinking of the young men.
I'd like to add here he's trying to help his audience giving birth to ideas, and I would imagine even giving birth to questions.
Absolutely. And I remember you said last week, Kelly, that to produce new thoughts, because precisely the process of birthing of new ideas first came from the fact that you're capable to go into the space where you feel a certain enthusiasm and a certain desire to expand knowledge, because the intention to create more knowledge is first and foremost an emotional stuff and not an intellectual stuff.
It starts there, yeah. I've been kind of practicing with my some of my friends during the week, and it's quite amazing. Just trying to imitate Socrates.
Yeah.
There's a great book that brings up that imitates or mimics or causes a lot of the same effect I see in this dialogue with the questions Socrates asks, to elicit, draw out, welcome, invite, cajole, whatever might be inside the other person. And it's simply this classic by Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And Kelly, I think it's you who just mentioned you were practicing it this week.
Yeah.
Well, then, if you haven't read that book, I recommend that to everybody, young and old, and to read it every few years, because it's revolutionary in approaching other people with your entire focus on them, and your entire concern is to take a sincere interest in them. And it's a wonderful skill set and experience.
Very influential book, that one.
Yeah, I'd like to add, I've been, kind of like in a playful way, like it's not a struggle. Well, it's a struggle in a playful way, I guess you call it. And because you're playing, you kind of take the stress level down among your peers. And it just helps the whole process flow better.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that truly you, in my understanding, you stress truly the...
Did you freeze, Quan?
The essential, the birthing of new thoughts on different levels. And now, if you're okay, if everybody agree, we just keep on with the dialogue with the same person reading Socrates and Paul keeping on reading Theaetetus. Is it all right with everyone?
Yes.
Okay,
sure.
Cool. So let's go with
On the start of the page
27. Yeah, page 27, and you see the number 156 on the right margin. In truth, Socrates, they are hard and blah blah.
Yeah. Okay. In truth, Socrates, they are a hard and unimpressible set that you speak of.
They are indeed, my son, an illiterate lot. But there are others much more subtle in language, whose mystical doctrines I am about to describe. And the leading principle on which all the theories we have just mentioned depend is this: that motion is everything, and beside that, nothing else is. Of this motion, there are two kinds, each infinite in its manifestations. The one having the faculty of acting, the other of being acted on. Well, from the union and close contact of these with each other, offspring is produced, also infinite in its number of forms, but again of two kinds. One, the sensible, the other, sense. That is, a power of perception, which always is produced along with the object of sense and is born at the same instant with it. Now, the senses we express by such terms as these, we call them acts of seeing, hearing, smelling, besides feelings of cold or heat, even the emotions of pleasure and pain, or desire and fear. And though there are endless varieties of these which have no names at all, yet those which have names are very numerous. Now, the class of phenomena which we speak of as objects of sense are produced simultaneously with each of the senses. Colors of all kinds for different sorts of eyesight, and in the same way sounds for hearing, and the other sensuous effects that are produced by a simultaneous birth with the other senses. Now, what has this story to do with our former inquiries? Do you understand?
I can't say that I do, Socrates.
Then attend, and we will see if we can arrive at a conclusion. The import of the argument is this: that all things with which we are conversant have motion, but in that motion,
Down.
Maybe we have to move the page.
a little bit.
There are sometimes speed and sometimes slowness.
Yeah. Little scroll down. But in that motion, there is sometimes speed and sometimes slowness. Now, the slow kind of movement takes place without change of position and produces its results in this way. That which has speed has a real motion towards the sentient faculties which will admit of a union, and the results so produced are quicker, for they have motion in space, and their movement is naturally one of change in position. Thus, when the eye and any other object suited to the nature of that organ unite and produce whiteness, and the perception of whiteness coincident and congenial with it, which never could have resulted had each of them gone to any other, then at the moment when the sight from the eyes and the whiteness from the object, which in contact with the eyes produces the color, meet in mid-course, the eye becomes filled with sight and then begins to see. And the result is not sight, but a seeing eye. While the object, which together with the eye gave birth to the appearance of the color, is invested with whiteness. And thus, here too, the effect is produced. Here too, the effect produced is not whiteness, but a white stick or stone or whatever object it may be, the surface of which happens to be colored with such a color. And so it is with all other qualities. We must take the same view of hard and hot and everything else. Viz, am I saying that right? Via that, as we before said, what? Just viz.
Viz.
Viz. Namely, that, as we said before, thank you, Paul, breaking the fourth wall, nothing has an absolute existence by itself, but that all effects are produced by a relation and intercourse between patient and agent, and varied in their results according to the kind of movement. For to conceive of both an agent and also a patient in any one thing singly, so as to deny motion, is, they tell us, an impossibility. There can be no agent until it has come into contact with a patient, nor a patient unless it has an agent. And that which, by being in contact with one thing, is an agent, becomes in turn a patient combined with some other thing.
Oh my God.
Right?
Oh, sorry, I
Yeah.
didn't know.
Well, interjection?
We'll let him finish his thought and see what happens.
Yes, finish the paragraph because I would
Yeah.
like to offer a little speech after that
Yeah,
paragraph
yeah.
to make
Lovely.
things clear.
It's a
Could
great
you make
paragraph.
this? Could you make this one little bit bigger, please? Just a teeny tiny teensy bit bigger.
Yeah, give me a
Well,
moment here. It's supposed to work.
Well, meanwhile, that which, by being in contact with one thing as an agent, becomes in turn a patient combined with some other thing. So that from all these considerations, we must conceive, as I said at first, that no one quality can exist singly and by itself. It only becomes so and so to the particular person who perceives it. And absolute existence must be taken away from everything, even though we, partly from familiarity and partly from want of skill, have been compelled to use it for many purposes in our late discussion. We ought not, however, as the philosophers tell us, to concede the existence of anything belonging to me or to anybody else, nor this, nor that, nor any other term that tends to fix a thing as constant. We should speak of them according to the true nature of the phenomena, as brought into being, or created, or perishing, or being altered. For if one adopts any term that fixes existence, he is easily proved to be in the wrong. We ought to use the above expressions both of things severally and as of an aggregate of many, such generalizations as they convey by the terms man or stone or any particular creature or kind of things. Well, Theaetetus, these doctrines seem nice. Would you like a further taste of them as of food that you relish?
I don't know, Socrates. Indeed, I cannot make up my mind, I think, is what's coming up next. My mind, even about you, whether you are stating what you really think or are making an experiment on me.
I would like to interrupt you guys here. The big paragraph that Bruce read is proposing the idea of Protagoras. Okay, it's a very refined and intellectual way to explain that man is the measure of all things, and not only man as a general category, but each particular man is the measure of all things, because if you remember what you read or what you heard, you have the eye and the object of seeing. So you have not the side, but the eye seeing, or even better, the eye, Bruce's eye seeing, or Paul's eye seeing. Okay, so here we have the, how can I say it, the exaltation of pure subjectivity, and Heraclitus plus Protagoras are the two main proponents of that idea. And I have to say that the length and the subtle irony in the description of that theory is giving us a hint on the position of Plato's and of Socrates. I don't know if you have a reaction about that.
A hint about
Sorry, go, Bruce.
after you.
Again, you know, I know it's going to sound a bit weird, but I have a totally different reaction in the sense of when Bruce was reading that last paragraph in particular, what did it you know, conjure in my mind? Straight away, I head to science, and don't ask me why. I'm just fixated on it for the moment. Most of you, I would assume, and maybe not, but one of the theories that's competing for life in the world of science and cosmology these days is the anthropic principle. The idea that the universe is designed to produce observers like us, that the meaning of the universe is contained within that notion, that it has no meaning whatsoever, unless there are observers to participate. Now that fits all sorts of religious concepts as well, etc., etc. But almost the preceding paragraph, everything that you were reading, Bruce, I just happened to be reading something about this last night or the night before, and it just triggered that memory straight away.
Yeah.
You know, that man's relationship to the universe is as a creation of the universe, which has all sorts of implications for you know, directed evolution, all sorts of things that are you know, up for grabs at the moment in the scientific world.
Yeah.
What
Well, I
struck,
would say that oh, sorry, go ahead.
yes, thanks. What struck me was when they said qualities cannot exist in themselves. I've thought about that, the whole subject of qualities before, but this kind of stumps me. Can anyone explain what that might mean? Qualities can't exist by themselves?
Yes.
Um,
Okay, I would cheat a little bit. Okay, let's not forget that all the dialogue of the Theaetetus is about what is knowledge. Okay, and the answer will be given in 3 pieces. Let's not forget that we only at page 28 to 29, and the whole dialogue is 135 pages. Okay,
Oh,
so we at the 10% or 12% of the dialogue. So the 3
I'm
pieces.
getting ahead of myself.
Well, I think that it's okay that you ask that question because after all, I want to give people general indication to have the most intelligent and the most subtle possible understanding of that dialogue, because as I said the first time, it's hardcore epistemology. Okay, so the 3 main parts of the dialogue is the answer by Protagoras. Knowledge is senses perception. Okay, and expressed in a very subtle manner. And be careful, listen, be careful to the way that it is given as answer, because that first layer is not wrong. Okay, that first layer is a reality. Part of knowledge is senses perception, but is it only sense perception? Okay, that is why the Theaetetus is 135 pages and not 25 pages. The second part of the dialogue will say knowledge is sense perception, but is also the intellectual understanding of it. Okay, so let's not forget the 6 layers of the mind. The first layer being sense perception, the second layer being the words, the concept, the images. So when we read that, never forget that Plato or Socrates are not saying that those layers are not legit. They are legit. But do we have something more than those basic layers? Okay. And finally, the final answer from the Theaetetus, and never forget that in the Platonic dialogue, not every answers are given. Okay, some fundamental answers are given just to excite your power of agape, of enthusiasm, of the aristocratic man in you, so you produce them between the lines of the Theaetetus. And the third part, which is the final answer of the Theaetetus, is that knowledge is sense of perception combined to intellect, but with an account. Okay, and when they say account, the Greek word that is chosen to say account is logos. Okay, because you know that logos has many layers of meaning. It can simply means a word, a sentence, a story, but it can also mean universal principle. So the choice of the word, the logos, was on purpose, because there are other words in ancient Greek which means exactly a word or a sentence. But Plato chose logos to open the possibility above the first 3 layers, once again, who are legit. Okay, sense of perception, concept, and the capacity to have an account at the first level of that concept, an explanation, or what I said the last time, semaion, a representation.
Representation.
Okay, so I'm sorry for those technical explanation, but I hope that it will be useful for the deeper understanding of the dialogue. And I would like to stress the fact that even for something, and that is truly the mark of a gentleman, of an aristocratic man, even for a theory that he doesn't agree with, he would make the effort to present it as in a refined manner. But if you perceive the subtle irony in that, it's obvious for the people capable to perceive the subtle irony in that, that for him is not the end of the story.
David, you had a comment?
My one question was, where exactly did he use the logos or introduce it specifically?
It will be in the third. It will be in the third part of the Theaetetus. But if you read some notes in small characters, they will refer to that.
Okay, and just to be clear, so yeah, Socrates right now, as you were saying, he's giving an account of that Protagorean idea, right? He's not talking about his take on things right now. Everything that he was just saying was really him describing the Protagorean outlook, correct?
Exactly, and
okay.
in a gentlemanly manner, with a little bit of irony.
I have to, reading what he just said, as with you, Paul, it brought to mind much that I read about quantum physics and the impact of consciousness and the presence of the scientist or the observer on experiments, along the lines of, the eye creates the sight, according to what we just read. And it's absolutely thrilling to get a couple of good books on quantum physics geared, written to lay people, to understand that the intention, the presence of the experimenter and the observer dictates the outcome of the experiment. It's different according to each one of those, and each different experimenter with the exact same conditions. When they're studying energy at its finest, tiniest measurable point, it's not a thing, it's not a wave, it's something of each, and we've got absolute impact and influence over it. And to read this old text and to see that someone a couple thousand years ago intuited it in such a way as to describe it like this, presumably well before microscopes and other amazing technologies, it's amazing. It's astounding.
There's so many possibilities too there, Bruce, because in terms of intuiting that knowledge, maybe they were actually aware of a pre-existing science that gave them a better intuitive understanding, if you like. And we are only just now, in our own stumbling way, coming to an understanding of something that they intuited and believed as part of their being.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, Paul, the day before the fire, what would you rescue from the library at Alexandria?
Yeah, that's a really good question, isn't it? Yeah, really good question. Yeah,
Who knows what was,
if it was happening now, there are a couple of books I'd whack in a bag straight away, that's for sure. But I could probably find them fairly quickly in my space. But from the Library of Alexandria, the entirety of the Hermeticus.
Thank you. Right. To your point of we don't know what was known back then. We just don't.
What we're trying to do is to understand what they think they knew on the basis of the writings. And I think Quan is doing a wonderful job of providing a foundation for, explaining aspects of it that leads you to a higher understanding. I mean, there are a lot of different understandings of this. I mean, I'll give you another example. I was reading the other night, this is another good book that I was reading. It's a reference to another writer or a group of writers who have done a thorough analysis of all of Plato's dialogues and come up with the idea that they are actually treatises on music theory. because there is a geometry and a proportion in the structure of the dialogues in terms of, like, you know, the first 5 minutes of the dialogue versus the next 15 minutes of the dialogue, whatever, that works out to have geometric proportions that correspond to music proportions. You know, thirds, fifths, sevenths, etc., the harmonic progression. So it ties in with everything that you ever, you know, think about in terms of the harmony of the spheres and everything like that. There was an awareness and a knowledge that we understand these days in terms of electromagnetic theory, particularly in terms of resonance and frequency, if you like, torsion, and the various relationships that we're, you know, slowly coming out into the general public awareness. But
Yeah.
it's what I say when I can't help but notice these references in what we're reading today. And the only reason that I do is because, you know, I've been directed in my readings and things like that by other people who've looked at this stuff and said, yeah, I sense there's a certain amount of science going on here. Let's see what we can do with that. I mean, it all comes back to what Kwan is saying in a lot of ways too here, you know, that there are depths to the knowledge.
Exactly.
And I agree with you completely, Bruce, that we can come close if we like, but we can't really ever know.
Right.
We don't know exactly what was informing a Plato or a Socrates in the entirety of their knowledge.
Yeah, but I think that I'm very happy with your reaction, but because it's exactly that Plato would have wanted. Okay, that people would produce new thoughts between the lines, because in the Platonic dialogue, what is fundamental, that don't expect him to give the answer. He just wants to put you in the mindset of the aristocratic man.
I'll mention one other quick little thing here too, Bruce, because you might be interested, you might even want to follow up on this. When you were talking about the quantum physics aspect and the observer effect, are you aware of the work of a gentleman by the name of William Tiller?
No.
Okay, now I'm not exactly sure what particular, you know, was he a biologist, a botanist, whatever he was. Very, very much aware of experiments done in the Soviet Union on intentionality and things like that. He took it a few steps further and ran a series of experiments using some well-experienced meditators, 2 men, 2 women, who were tasked with forming an intention while they were meditating. And that intention was a directed intention. In other words, something that was directed to have a measurable physical outcome. And one of the examples was, the intention was to shorten the time that a fruit fly pupae took to develop to adulthood, from whatever number of days it normally is to a reduced number. And this was done by a bunch of meditators getting into a room, reading the intention out loud, then meditating, and then seeking to put that meditative thought into a box. And I mean literally, physically into a box. It was an electric circuit. They were then able to take that box away from the area of the experiment, in other words, to another physical location, and put it next to a bunch of fruit fly pupae, etc., 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 and test the result. And lo and behold, they got, you know, beyond statistical probability measurements. A couple of other experiments involved raising the pH of water with nothing added to the water, just by the sheer intention of the meditators, etc., etc. You know, these are pretty out there experiments, and you can read into them whatever you like, but they are absolutely intriguing when you consider that, you know, if you want to put them on the same bandwagon as, you know, like the quantum experiments, proof that to some degree that we barely understand, intentionality, the power of the mind to influence the physical world, is real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry
Man,
for what it's worth.
well, gentlemen, I think that Linda has her hand raised up for the last 5 minutes. So Linda, what do you want to say?
Hi, sorry. I listened to most of the conversation from last week, but when I'm sorry I laughed, but that was so convoluted, that whole sentence back there. I was getting all lost. But what it made me think was 2 things. One is that we don't have the best of senses, probably. I mean, we can't hear humpback whales. right? And that just because we can't perceive it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I kind of disagree with what he's saying. And then the other thing is I wonder what relation this might have to Buddhism, because I seem to recall being asked what a cup was and trying to figure out, right? And how and our sensations of hot and cold and how much we do or don't control them. So those are my two thoughts. I don't know if Kwan has anything to say to that. Thank you.
Oh, I would control myself and not talk too much about Buddhism. I would say that the only thing that is common between Buddhism and the Theaetetus that we are reading tonight is epistemology. Okay, that's the common endeavor to know what is true knowledge.
Just a note here, because I do see another hand, but I think it's good to keep the flow of the dialogue as well. We do want to get the questions in, but we should pace it so that we don't so because otherwise it generates a lot of thoughts, so we want it to, but I mean, Juan's in charge, but we want to make sure we get the flow, because he's really only said a bit so far, and God only knows where he knows where he's going to take this, but it might not be where we expect. So I don't know that we want to say too much at the same time.
Right, I agree with Dave. Let's go.
Take it away, Socrates.
Yeah.
All right. So he just said he's not sure if he's what to think or making an experiment. Do you forget, my friend, that I myself neither know anything of these matters nor claim them as my own? I'm not the parent. I only act as a man midwife to you. And that is why I employ charms and set by you these clever things for you to take a taste of them severally, till at last I help you to bring your own views to light. When that has been done, I will then examine whether it shall prove of empty air or a product of real genius. Take heart then, and don't give in, but bravely and like a man, answer what you really think about the questions I may put.
Ask me then.
Then tell me once more whether you accept the doctrine that nothing really is but becomes always right and good, as well as such other qualities as we lately spoke of.
Well, Socrates, now that I hear you arguing in this way, it does seem to me in the highest degree reasonable that we should view the matter as you have put it.
Then don't let us leave off while any part of the argument is incomplete. We have yet to discuss the subject of dreams and of madness, among other diseases, and such fancies as result from wrong hearing or wrong seeing or any other false perception. For you are aware, of course, that in all such cases as those, the argument we maintain is allowed to
Scroll.
The argument we maintain is allowed to be proved false, since in these states and conditions there assuredly are such things as false perceptions, and so far from each man's fancies being true to himself, absolutely nothing of what seems really is so to him.
Nothing can be more true than what you say, Socrates.
Then what reply to these facts remains for one who takes as his axiom that perception is knowledge, and that what each man fancies is so to him who fancies it?
For my own part, Socrates, I hesitate to say I have no reply to give, because just now you blame me for saying so. For in truth, I cannot dispute that people who are mad or dreaming do imagine what is false, when some of them fancy they are gods, and others that they have wings, and conceive themselves in their sleep to be flying.
Here is another difficulty about them, which I think you'll understand, and especially about the question of such imaginings being mere dreams or sober. I'm saying this all over again. Here is another difficulty about them, which I think you will understand, and especially about the question of such imaginings being mere dreams or sober realities.
And what is that?
What I dare say you have often heard people asking, what proof a man can show, if anyone should ask him, as at the present moment, whether we are asleep and dreaming of all that is now in our thoughts, or awake and talking to each other in sober earnest?
Well, certainly, Socrates, it is hard to say by what proof we could demonstrate it, for all the details are the same in both and go together like counterparts. For instance, in the conversation we have just held, we might, for aught there is to prevent it, fancy we had been talking to each other in a dream. And conversely, when in a dream, we fancy we are talking to each other. The latter case is strangely like the former.
You see then that to raise the doubt is at least not difficult when it is called in question whether we are really talking or only dreaming. Nay, I go farther and say that if we are half of our lives asleep and the other half awake, in each of these periods, our minds are convinced that whatever opinions present themselves to us, these are really and certainly true. So that for the same general duration, we say these are realities to us as much as those, and we insist on the truth of both alike.
Certainly we do.
Is not the very same to be said about diseases and mad fits, except that the time is not in this case the same?
Rightly remarked.
What then? Is truth to be determined by the length or shortness of time?
That would indeed be absurd in many respects.
Can you then show any other clear proof which of these opinions are true?
I don't think I can.
Then let me tell you the course of reasoning that would be pursued by those who make it an axiom that whatever seems, that is so to him who fancies it. And if I mistake not, their argument is conveyed by a question as thus: if Theaetetus, a thing is entirely different, has it any property the same as another thing? Now mind, we are not to conceive the subject of the question to be partly the same as and partly different from the other, but as wholly and entirely different.
I say then that it is impossible for a thing to have any quality that is the same, either in its property or in other respect, when it is quite different.
Must we not then allow that a thing of this sort is also unlike the other?
I suppose so.
Then if it happens that a thing is getting like or unlike something, viz. Either to itself or to something else, we shall say that while it is thus assimilating itself, it is becoming the same, and while it is varying from it, different.
That cannot be otherwise.
And as we said before, I think that the agents in nature were infinite in number, and so also the patients.
We did.
And also that one thing in union with another will produce not the same, but different results from what it would in combination with something else.
Assuredly so.
Now then let us speak of myself and yourself and of the agents that affect us, according to the same reasoning, and talk about Socrates in health and Socrates out of health. Are we to say the one case is like or unlike to the other?
Do you mean by Socrates out of health, Socrates as a whole, compared with him also as a whole when in health?
You are quite right in your surmise. That is just what I mean.
Then of course I say unlike.
Then he is also another Socrates in precisely the same way as he is unlike.
We must allow that.
And you will say the same, of course, of Socrates asleep and in any of the states we just before mentioned.
I shall.
Will not now any one of those things that are in their nature agents, when it gets hold of Socrates in good health, deal with him as one person, and when out of health as another?
Of course that will be so.
Then in such case, I, as the patient, and it, as the agent, will produce between us different results?
Of course.
Then when I drink wine, being in good health, it seems to me both fragrant and sweet to the taste.
Yes.
We assume that it produced in accordance with what we have before stated, that is to say, the agent and the patient together and in mutual motion and relation with each other, both sweetness and a sensation of it. This sensation on the part of the patient made his tongue to be sentient, and the sweetness from the wine, having a motion of its own in respect of the patient, made the wine sweet to the healthy tongue, in reality as well as in appearance.
Undoubtedly, our former admissions were to this effect.
But when the wine finds me out of health, in the first place, it finds me really and truly not the same person. For it came to me before when I was unlike my present self.
Yes.
Then Socrates in this, the unhealthy condition and the drinking of the wine together produce on the tongue a sense of sourness. And in the wine, a sourness which comes into being for him. And they make the wine not indeed sourness, but sour. And me, not the sense of it, but sentient.
Quite so.
Then I, under these circumstances, shall always have the same perception. For the sense of the other is itself different, and makes the person perceiving it different both in character and in identity. And the thing which acts on me as an agent, if it were in contact with another, would never produce the same results and so become the same. For by producing a different result from a different patient, it will itself become of a different character.
All that is true.
And shall I not? And I shall not become sentient of this or that for myself, nor will it be of this particular quality for itself.
Certainly not.
But of course, I must become sentient of something when I become sentient at all. For one cannot become sentient and yet sentient of nothing, you know. And the agent must become something to somebody when it becomes sweet or sour or anything of that kind. For to become sweet, yet sweet to nobody, is an impossibility.
Assuredly.
There is nothing left for it then, but that this being or becoming must be mutual. For as I have said, the being of both is necessarily coupled together, but it is not coupled to any other than what we are, nor to ourselves. It remains, therefore, for us only to be coupled to each other, so that whether one uses the term is, he must say it is to somebody, or it is of something, or in relation to something, or the term becomes. But he must not himself speak of anything either being or becoming singly of itself, nor allow another to use such expressions. This is the conclusion which the foregoing argument indicates.
Certainly does so, Socrates.
Then when anything which affects me is an agent to me and not to another, I also have perception of it, but another has not.
Of course.
It follows that my sense is a true sense to me, for it belongs to a union of which I am an essential member. Thus, I am a judge, as Protagoras affirms, of whatever is, and I can fairly say that it is so to me, or of what is not, that it is not.
It seems so.
I want to know then how, if I am infallible and cannot be mistaken in my own views about what is or becomes, I can fail to have an accurate knowledge in whatever I have perception.
That would be impossible.
Then you put it very well when you said that knowledge is nothing else than perception. So it comes to the same thing, whether according to Homer and Heraclitus and all that school, all things are ever in motion, like currents. Or according to Protagoras, that wisest of men, man is the measure of all things. Or according to Theaetetus, come back. Thank you. These facts being assumed, that perception comes to be knowledge. Is it not so, Theaetetus? Must we say this doctrine is a newly born brat of yours, and that I have been concerned only in the delivery of it? Or how say you?
So it must be, Socrates.
This child of yours, then, as it seems, whatever it be worth, we have at last brought into the world. And now that it has been born, the next step will be to perform the ceremony, in good earnest too, of going round by reasoning on it, taking good heed that the thing born does not turn out unworthy of being brought up, a mere creature of air and a sham? Or do you think that as the doctrine is yours, we are bound to rear and not to discard it? Or will you patiently see it put to the test of inquiry and not be very full of wrath if someone should try to take it from you like a first child from a mother?
Theaetetus will stand it, Socrates. He is not ill-natured. But tell me, in heaven's name, is it not, on the other hand, just the other way?
You are quite an enthusiast in argument, and a worthy good man, Theodore. If that's Theodore, we have a new character amongst us. When did Theodore
sorry.
appear?
Susan.
Sorry.
Okay, I think it's Susan who is
Yeah, Susan.
Theodore. Yeah.
Okay, but he already read it, didn't he?
I did, but you're supposed to.
Yeah.
Okay, so Theaetetus will stand it, Socrates. He is not ill-natured. But tell me, in heaven's name, is it not, on the other hand, just the other way?
You are quite an enthusiast in argument, and a worthy good man, Theodore. If you think I am a sort of bag of words and can easily take out of it and deliver a speech to prove that all this is, again, not so, you don't comprehend what comes of these discussions, that none of these arguments proceeds from me, but always from the party who converses with me, and that I myself know nothing more except just this trifling matter, how to get a subject from some other clever person and to give it a fairly good reception. And so I will endeavor now to get this from our young friend here, and not to say it myself.
What you propose, Socrates, is better, and therefore act accordingly.
Do you know then, Theodore, what it is that I am surprised at in your companion Protagoras?
What is that?
What?
I'm glad you both asked. The general account of his views he has given charmingly, how that what seems to be each is so to him. What seems to each man is so to him. Time out. Is that any better? That's not any better.
You want me to zoom in more? Is that better?
There we
Let's
are.
try that. What is it that I surprised about Protagoras? The general account of his views he has given charmingly. How that which seems to each man is so to him. But I wonder, at the beginning of his treatise, and that he did not commence his essay on truth with these words: the measure of all things is a pig, or a baboon, or some other still outlandish specimen of such creatures as are endowed with the faculty for feeling. For then he would have began his address to us in grand style, and indeed with no little contempt for us, by showing that while we have been looking up to him as to a god for his wisdom, he all the time was no better in respect of intelligence than the tadpole of a frog, not to say than any other human being. For if that is to be true and real to each man, which he forms an opinion of through perception, and if one man is not to give a decision on the state and the condition of another any better than himself, nor to have any better right to form a judgment about the opinion of another as to its truth or falsehood, but if, I repeat, each man is to have his own views peculiar to himself, and in all these cases they are right and true views, then why in the world, my friend, is Protagoras so very wise as justly to be thought worthy of being the teacher of others with large fees, while we are less intelligent and have to go to school to him, when every man is in fact the measure of his own wisdom? Surely we must say that Protagoras is talking mere claptrap in all this. As for my own poor services in my obstetric art, I say nothing about the ridicule that we incur, and indeed the whole profession and business of dialectic. For of course our examination of and our attempt to refute each other's fancies and opinions, if every man's are equally right, must be a long and dreary waste of breath, if Protagoras' truth is true, and did not give its oracular utterances from the depth of the book in mere joke.
Socrates, the man, oops, sorry.
Yeah.
Socrates, the man is a friend of mine, as you yourself just now said. Therefore, I don't wish to have Protagoras proved to be in the wrong through any admissions of mine, nor on the other hand to insist that my views are right against your convictions. Do therefore once more take Theaetetus, who certainly seemed just now to respond very readily to your appeal.
Supposing, Theodore, you were to go to Sparta to visit the wrestling schools, would you expect to look at others stripped, some of them but poor figures, without having to display against theirs your own form by taking off your clothes to compare it?
Do you think I would not if I thought they were likely to allow me and to comply with my request? Just so I hope now to persuade you to let me remain a mere spectator, and not to drag me to the wrestling ground, old and stiff as I am, but to try a throw with one who is younger and more pliant in limb.
Well, Theodore, if that is what pleases you, it does not displease me, as they say in the proverb. Once more, then, we must go to our clever friend Theaetetus. Come now, Theaetetus, to take first the views we have discussed. Do you not share in our surprise that you will thereby prove all at once not inferior in wisdom to any man or even any god? For you don't suppose that Protagoras' measure is said at all less in reference to gods than to men?
Indeed, I don't. And to reply to your question, I am very much surprised. But when we were discussing in what way they meant to say that which seems to each man is so to him, it seemed to me very well said. But now it has suddenly turned out quite otherwise.
You are young, my friend, and therefore your ears and your mind are readily open to the lecture you have heard. But don't be alarmed, for in reply to this, Protagoras or someone in his behalf will say, my fine fellows, men and boys, here you are sitting together and talking fine and bringing forward the gods, though I expressly exempt them both in speaking and in my writings, and decline to say whether there are or are not such beings. You only say what the mass of mankind would accept if they heard it, that it is strange if human beings, each and severally, shall have no superiority in respect of wisdom over any animal, but as for proof or cogent argument, you adduce none whatever. You adopt a view that is a mere probability, albeit if Theodore or any other geometer chose to employ it, he would be worth simply nothing. Consider, therefore, both you and Theodore, if you are prepared to accept statements made on such weighty matters by mere probabilities and plausible talk.
Why, Socrates, neither you nor we would say that that was right.
Then we must view the matter in a different light, as it appears from what you and Theodore say.
Differently by all means.
Then let us proceed thus to the inquiry whether, in truth, knowledge and perception are the same or something different. For it was to this that the whole of our argument was directed, and for this that we mooted all those strange outlandish theories, was it not?
It was without doubt.
Shall we then allow that when we perceive things by the faculties of seeing or hearing, we at the same time also know every particular about them? For instance, if we have not learned the dialect of foreigners, are we to say that we don't hear them when they speak, or that we don't hear them with understanding? So again, if we don't know letters, when we look at them, are we to say that we don't see them, or to insist that, of course, if we see them, we understand them?
Only just this part of them, Socrates, that we actually see and hear, we shall say we understand. That is to say, that we both see and know the shape and color of the letters, and hear and apprehend the shrill or the deep tones of the voices. But such explanations of the meaning of both as writing masters or interpreters give, we shall allow that we do not know, as we do not realize them by seeing or hearing.
Bravo, Theaetetus. To encourage you, I shall not care to raise any objection to your answer. But see, there is another difficulty coming upon us, and it is for you to consider how we can get clear of it.
And what is that?
A question of this kind, which might be put, is it possible, if a man once became acquainted with something, that while he yet has a recollection of it and retains it, he should not know the very fact that he remembers? But perhaps I'm using more words than I need. I merely wish to ask, if a man who has learned something does not know it, I merely mean to ask, if a man who has learned something does not know it when he remembers it.
How can that be, Socrates? What you say would be a miracle.
Perhaps the fault is mine for talking nonsense. But consider, you call seeing perceiving, do you not? And sight perception?
I do.
It follows then that a man who has seen something has become acquainted with what he saw, according to your late axiom?
Yes.
Well, I suppose you allow there is such a faculty as memory?
Yes.
Is it of nothing or of something?
Of something, of course.
Therefore, of something or other that one learnt and had a perception of?
Of course.
Well, now, if a man saw an object, I suppose he remembers it sometimes.
He does.
When he shuts his eyes? Or does he forget it when he does that?
Why, it would be rather bold to assert that.
But we must assert it if we are to maintain our axiom as before. Otherwise, it is gone.
On my word, I suspect as much, but I have not a sufficiently clear apprehension. Say therefore how.
Why, in this way. He who sees, we say, has become acquainted with that which he saw. For sight and sense and knowledge all are allowed to all be one.
Undoubtedly.
Well, but one who by sight became acquainted with what he saw, if he shuts his eyes, remembers it, and yet does not see it. Is it not so?
Yes.
But this doesn't see it means doesn't know it. If, as we say, he sees means he knows.
True.
It follows then that if a man became acquainted with something, though he still remembers it, he does not know it, since he does not actually see it. But we said that would be a miracle if it really happened.
What you say is very true.
It seems then that something which is impossible does occur if one maintains that knowledge and perception are identical.
It seems so.
Then we must assert that each of these is distinct.
So it appears.
What then can knowledge be? If we discuss it again, as it seems from the beginning, yet what are you going to do, Theaetetus?
About what?
Like some dunghill cock, we seem to me to have suddenly left the argument and to crow before we gain the victory.
How can that be?
It appears to me that we are acting like mere conversationalists. We form our premises with regard to the common acceptation of words, and we are content by such means to get the better in the argument. Thus, while we profess to be philosophers and not mere wranglers, we are unconsciously doing the very same as those learned and skillful disputants.
At present, I don't see your meaning.
Well, then I'll try to make what I mean to say clear to you on this subject. We asked, if a man who has learned something and has it in mind can be said not to know it. And by taking the case of one who has seen an object and afterwards, with his eyes shut, remembers it, though he does not see it, we said that he does not know it, and yet had it in his memory, which was impossible. And so this fine story of Protagoras came to an end, and with it yours, of the identity of knowledge and perception.
It seems so.
But it would not, I suspect, my friend, had the author of that other saying been alive, but he would have brought effective aid to it. At present, we are abusing it when it has none to befriend it. Indeed, it seems that even the guardians whom Protagoras left behind him, our friend Theodore here is one, don't care to interfere in its behalf. Well, then, we will make the venture ourselves and come to its aid for the sake of fair play.
I would
Nay,
like to
Soc-
interrupt you guys here.
Sure.
I would like to show at the page just before page 45, note the 7. Okay, so I read the note. There is a little subtle irony in mutos as distinct from logos. Okay, so mutos is the Greek word for story or storytelling. And that word mutos is a quite limited word, meaning it doesn't have so many layers of meaning, as distinct from logos, which is the word with many layers of meaning in Western philosophy. Okay, so why I want to attract you attention on that little detail is because the 5, 6, 7 pages that we just read came to the conclusion that on the central concept of semeion, of representation. So Socrates proves by reductio ad absurdum that it's not possible that knowledge is perception, because we can have 2 types of semeion. Okay, the semeion, the representation coming from the outside world when the eyes are open, and the semeion coming from the representation within the mind when the eyes are shut. Okay, so you will see that the Theaetetus is a dialogue that is structurally built from one type of lower semeion to a higher type of semeion till the ultimate semeion. Once again, don't forget the 6 layers of the mind. So here, the mutos versus the logos is a little irony that we are talking now about the sense of perception, but there are other layers, and that's here that the opposition between mutos and logos is interesting. And please keep in mind that semeion representations is the central concept used by that dialogue to go through the epistemological growth.
You're up, Susan.
And Quan, whatever word you were saying that began with an M, can you type that into the chat for me?
Mutos, like in mythology, okay? Things to mythology, rather than a Y, put an U. Mutos, M-U-T-H-O-S.
Okay, thank you. Nay, Socrates, it is Callias, the son of Hipponicus, who is the guardian rather than I. Somehow or other, we took to geometry and got away from the science of bare words. However, we shall feel obliged to you if you undertake the defense of him.
Very good. Then observe, Theodora, the kind of aid I am going to bring. For a man might have to make admissions still more damaging than those we have just made if he did not carefully attend to the lax use of phrases, how we are in the habit of saying yes and no to our ordinary answers. Must I tell you how that is, or Theaetetus?
Rather tell us all in common, only let the younger be the respondent. For if he gets a throw, he will be in a less awkward plight.
I tell you then what is the most formidable question of all. It is to this effect. Can a man at once know something and yet not know what he knows?
What answer now are we to give, Theaetetus?
That it is impossible, in my opinion.
Not at all. For if you intend to maintain that seeing, not at all if you intend to maintain that seeing is knowing. For how will you deal with a question that cannot be evaded, caught, as the saying is, in a tank, when some undaunted man asks, as he covers one of your eyes with his hand, whether you see his mantle with that covered eye, that covered one?
I suppose I shall say that I don't with that, but I do with the other.
then you at once see and don't see the same object?
Well, under those circumstances, yes.
I don't put that reservation, he will reply, nor did I ask you about the how, but simply whether what you know you also don't know. It now appears that you see what you don't see, and you have already allowed that seeing is knowing and not seeing is not knowing. Consider then what results from these premises.
You end up with Schrodinger's cat. Well, I see on reflection that it is just the contrary of what I said before.
And perhaps, my estimable friend, more difficulties of the same kind would have occurred to you if anyone put further questions to you. Can a man have a keen or a dull knowledge? Can he know close by but not far off? Can he know the same thing loudly and gently? There are countless questions of the like kind. By asking which, in the course of his argument, a light-armed fighting man serving for hire might entrap you, when you had to find knowledge to be the same as perception. Then, making a direct assault on seeing and smelling and senses of that sort, he would show your definition to be wrong, pressing you hard and allowing you no rest, till at last, in your admiration of that much to be coveted wisdom of his, you had allowed yourself to be bound hand and foot by him. And then, having got you fairly in his power and tied you to a string of other captives, he would at last consent to ransom you for whatever sum you could agree on between you. What defense, then, you may perhaps ask, would Protagoras make in aid of his own doctrine? Must we essay to state it?
By all means.
Well, then he will say all that we say in his behalf, and more than that, will make a direct attack on us, expressing his contempt for us in these terms. So then, this worthy, this Socrates, because a mere lad, when asked by him if it were possible for one and the same man at once to remember and yet not to know the same thing, was timid, and in his timidity said no, through having no faculty of foresight, has held up my illustrious self to ridicule in his reasonings. Whereas, in fact, you most heedless of disputants, Socrates, the case stands thus: when you are examining any views of mine, and to this end propose a question about them, if the party questioned gives such a reply as I should give, and is beaten, then I am proved to be in the wrong. But if his answer is of a different sort than the person himself to whom it was put, for instance, do you imagine anyone will concede to you that if the memory abides in anyone of something that he underwent, it is a feeling of the same kind as it was when he underwent it? Viz., now that he no longer feels, it. Or again, do you suppose he will hesitate to admit that thus it is possible for the same man to know and not to know the same thing? Or should he fear such an admission as that, do you suppose he will allow you to maintain that a person who is undergoing some change is identical with what he was before he began to undergo it? In other words, that a man is the particular person always, and not several, and that by a process of becoming this or that in endless variety, if a becoming unlike should take place in him? For I suppose we must be careful not to catch up each other's words. No, my very fine fellow, he will say, do come to the precise point of my assertion and prove it wrong if you can. Show that our perceptions are not special and peculiar to each of us, or that, if they are such, not at all the more for that what seems to anyone becomes so to him, and to him only, or say is so to him, if we may use the verb to be, to whom it seems. But in talking of swine and baboons, you not only act swinishly yourself, but you persuade your hearers to do the same towards my writings, which is not fair play. For I insist that the truth is, as I have stated in my book, that each of us is a measure of what is and what is not. Though I allow that there is an enormous difference between one man and another in this very respect, that to one man this seems to be, and therefore is to another that. In this sense, I am far from denying that there is such a thing as wisdom or a wise man. On the contrary, I even affirm that this very man is wise, who, by producing a change in another, to whom certain things seem and are bad, makes them seem and be good. Now, don't carpet my statement again from the way in which I have expressed it, but take this illustration that you may know my meaning still more clearly. Recall to mind what we said before, that if a man is out of health, what he takes both seems and is nauseous to him, albeit it seems and is just the contrary to one in health. Now, it is not for us to make either of these wiser on the subject, for indeed that is not possible. Nor are we to find fault with him and assure him that the sick man is a stupid fellow for thinking so and so, but the healthy man is wise for thinking something quite different. No, we must change him so as to take the other view, for this other disposition is a better one. Just so in educating him, we must alter him from the bad mental habit to the better. Only while your physician effects this by drugs, your professor does it by argument. For we cannot say that a person had false opinions once, but somebody made him hold the truth afterwards. We cannot think what to him is not, nor anything else than what he feels, but this must always be true to him. In fact, the case is this: when through a vicious condition of mind, men hold vicious opinions, a right condition causes them to hold right opinions. These views some people, through want of practice and reasoning, call true views. All I say is that the one sort of views is better than the other sort, but not at all truer. And, my dear Socrates, I am very far from calling wise men frogs. As far as they deal with men's bodies, I call them physicians. As far as with plants, husbandmen. And I affirm that even these, if any of their plants are out of health, produce in them good and healthy sensations, and such as are true to it instead of vicious ones, just as your wise and good speakers cause that what is good instead of what is bad should appear to states to be right. Rewind. Just as your wise and good speakers cause that what is good instead of what is bad should appear to states to be right. That's the best I can do. For I lay it down as an axiom that whatever each state considers just and right, that is so to it, so long as it holds them to be so. Only your wise man makes what is good to seem and therefore to be good, instead of what is bad being true to them in any particular case. In the same way, your professor also, if he can train his pupils after this method, is wise and deserves large sums of money from those instructed by him. According to this view, then, some persons are wiser than others. Not yet. And yet, no one holds false views. No, whether you like it or not, you must submit to be a measure. For by considerations of the above kind, the statement we are discussing is shown to be consistent. If you can call it in question by denying its premises, do so by arguing against it in the discourse. Or, if you prefer that method, by questions, for even this is not to be shunned by a man of sense. Act, however, in this way. Don't be unfair in your questions, for it is most unreasonable that one who professes to care about uprightness and truth should do nothing but cheat all through his discourse. And I call it cheating in circumstances like the present, when a man does not observe the just distinction between arguing and conversing. In the former, saying what he does not really mean and trying to throw his adversary by every means in his power. In the latter, speaking always in earnest and setting up the other on his legs again by pointing out to him only those failures and slips in which he had been led into error by himself or by a course of bad teaching before. For if you act thus towards them, those who converse with you will blame themselves for their own confusion and perplexity, and not you. Rather, they will run after you and love you and dislike themselves. They will find a refuge from their own ignorance and philosophy in order that they may become what they were not and be rid of their former selves. If, however, you take the contrary course, as most do, then the contrary will be the result. You will make those who associate with you to hate learning instead of loving it when they get old. So, if you will take my advice, as I said before, you will not dispute in a surly and captious spirit, but bring yourself down to our level with sentiments of kindness and consider in good earnest what we mean when we lay it down as a plain truth. All things are in motion, and that whatever seems to each, that is so to a state or to an individual alike. From a right view of these doctrines, you will further consider whether knowledge and perception are the same or different, and not, as you did just now, from the familiar use of phrases and words, which the many drag and distort to bear any sense they please, and so cause each other every kind of perplexity. Such, Theodorus, is the aid I have rendered, by way of taking your friend's part, to the best of my poor abilities, a small contribution from a small store. Had he himself been alive, he would have defended his own views in more effective language.
You are
Theodorus?
joking, Socrates. You have come to the good man's aid with real spirit and courage.
I'm glad you think so, my friend. And now, tell me, did you notice Protagoras is saying just now with reproach to us that by holding our conversation with a boy, we made use of a boy's natural timidity to argue against his doctrines, and how scolding us for what he called our pleasantry and magnifying his own doctrine of measure, he bade us be serious in dealing with his argument?
Of course I noticed that, Socrates.
Well, then, do you advise us to do as he tells us?
I do, by all means.
Do you observe, then, that all the present company, except yourself, are mere boys? If, therefore, we are to comply with our friend's wishes, you and I, by questioning and answering each other, must give our serious attention to his argument, that we may not have this to complain of in us, that we have, for the second time, discussed the matter in joke by addressing ourselves to striplings.
Well, is not Theaetetus likely to follow an argument through all its mazes better than many who wear long beards?
Yes, but not better than you, Theodore. So don't suppose that it is my duty to take the part of your friend, now that he is no more, by every means in my power, while you are not bound to help him at all. Come, my friend, go with me, go with just me so far. 'Tis but a little way, till we ascertain whether you have a special claim to be an authority about diagrams, or all are as competent as you for their own purposes in astronomy and those other sciences in which you know you are considered to excel.
Oops, that went too high. It is not easy, Socrates, when one sits by you, to avoid giving one's views on any subject. I am afraid my joke was little to the purpose. When I said you would excuse me from stripping to show myself, as they do at Lacedaemon? No, you seem rather to incline to the practice of Skyron. At Lacedaemon, they tell you either to strip or to go, but you seem rather to act like Antaeus, for when anyone meets you in company, you don't let him go till you have made him strip and compelled him to try a throw with you in the argument.
You have admirably, Theodore, expressed my weakness by your simile. I, however, am stouter than those you speak of. For ere now, many and many a Hercules and a Theseus, on meeting me, men strong in talk, have pounded me right well. But I don't give it up for all that. So strong a desire has taken possession of my soul for exercises of this kind. Do not, therefore, on your part, refuse to anoint yourself for a bout with me, and so to benefit both yourself and me.
I have not another word to say against it, so take any course you please. Come of it what may, I must endure the fate, whatever it may be, of which you have woven the thread, and submit to be questioned on these subjects. Not, however, further than the limits you propose, shall I allow myself to be examined by you.
Well, even so far will do. And I pray you be very careful about this. Don't let us inadvertently make our discussion after the puerile fashion, lest someone should again reproach us with it.
Be quite sure I shall make every effort in my power.
Let us then, in the first instance, once more get a grip of the same, bless you, difficulty as before. Let us see whether we, rightly or wrongly, took offense at and found fault with the statement, because it made every man to be wise enough in himself, and whether Protagoras was right or wrong in granting that, in respect of better or worse, some people were superior to others, and that such really were wise. Was it not so?
It was.
Well, now, if he had been here in person to make that admission, instead of our making it for him as supporters of his cause, there would have been no need to take up the subject again and try to get it settled in this way. As it is, perhaps someone may say that we have no authority to make the admission on his behalf, and therefore it is the more proper course to come to an agreement between ourselves on this very question, for it makes a material difference in the argument, whether it is as Protagoras says, or the other way.
What you say is quite true.
Then let us arrive at this agreement as briefly as possible, and from no other premises than those supplied by his own reasoning.
How?
In this way, he says, I think that what seems to each man, that is so to him who thinks it so.
He does say that.
Then Protagoras, we also, on our parts, state the view of a human being, or rather the views of all human beings, when we affirm that everybody in the world thinks himself wiser than others in some things, and others wiser than himself in other things. Nay, more, that when people are in danger in military service, or in times of pestilence, or in a storm at sea, they behave towards those who hold the command in any such cases as they would toward divine powers, expecting to be saved by them, though in fact their only superiority over others consists in their knowledge. In fact, human life is full of such instances. Men seek others to teach and to direct both themselves and their domestic animals and even their trades. Or they think themselves competent to teach and competent to direct. Now, in all these cases, what are we to say but that the men themselves believe that wisdom or want of information resides with themselves?
That is the only conclusion we can come to.
They think then that wisdom means a true view and ignorance means a false opinion.
Of course.
Then how, Protagoras, are we to deal with your proposition? Must we say that these men always think truly, or sometimes truly and sometimes falsely? For if they do both, it follows, of course, that they do not always think the truth, but sometimes truth and sometimes falsehood. For consider, Theodore, whether anyone is likely, either of Protagoras' party or yourself, to contend that no man thinks another man is ignorant and holds false views.
Why, that is incredible, Socrates.
And yet that is the strait into which the argument is brought that affirms man to be the measure of all things.
How is that?
When you, after making up your own mind on some point, express to me your own opinion upon it, granted, this opinion, according to his statement, is true to you, Yet may we not, the rest of the world, become judges of your judgment? Or do we conclude that your views are invariably right? Is it not rather the case that multitudes set their opinion in opposition to yours, believing that your judgment and your opinion are alike wrong?
Yes, by heaven, Socrates, a mighty host indeed, as Homer says, who are ever causing me a world of trouble.
What then? Shall we say that in such cases you hold opinions that are true to you but are false to the vast majority?
That inference seems inevitable if we are to follow the argument.
And what must Protagoras himself infer? Surely he must grant either that neither he nor the majority really believe, as we know they do not, man is a measure, in which case the truth he has written about is truth to no one at all, or that he thinks so, but the majority do not. And then you are aware that in the first place, the more there are who don't think so, compared with those who do, in the same degree, it is truth more than it is not truth.
That must be so, if the opinion of each is to be the test of truth.
In the second place, his doctrine brings us to this sublime conclusion. In allowing that all hold opinions that are real to them, he, of course, concedes that the views of those who hold the contrary to his, and by which they consider his views are false, are true to them.
Undoubtedly.
Then he would be granting that his own opinion was untrue, in allowing that theirs is true, who think him in the wrong.
It certainly is so.
But the others, I presume, do not allow that they are mistaken.
Indeed, they do not.
And he allows that such a conviction in them also is true, to judge from what he has written.
Then by all without exception, and by Protagoras himself among the first, this truth of his is called in question. Or rather, let us say, by him at all events, it will be conceded, when he allows that the person who speaks against his, Protagoras' views, holds a true opinion. Then I say Protagoras himself must admit that neither a dog nor your ordinary man is a measure of anything about which he is uninformed. Is it not so? It is.
Since then, his doctrine is called in question by all, Protagoras' truth will be true to nobody, neither to himself nor to anyone else.
We are running down my friend too hardly, Socrates.
Hey, my good sir, I am not quite sure that we are not outrunning the truth. Certainly it must be presumed that he, being older, is wiser than we. Suppose now he were at this very moment to raise his head and shoulders up from the floor. He would very likely scold us roundly, me for talking nonsense and you for assenting to it, and then suddenly disappear and be off before we could stop him. As that cannot be, however, I suppose we must make use of ourselves as measures to find out what we are and to say always what we think. Thus, we may surely now affirm that anyone will allow this, that one man is wiser or is less well informed than another.
I think we may.
Shall we also say that the argument will stand best by the guiding line we drew when we were advocating Protagoras' doctrine, viz., that things generally are as they seem to be to each person, hot or dry or sweet or any other quality of the like kind, but that if anywhere and in any instances he shall grant that one man is superior to another, he must be content to say that not any woman or boy or even any creature is competent to undertake its own cure by its knowledge of what is wholesome for it, but that here, if anywhere, one is superior to another.
That is my opinion.
Then in politics also, you must admit that in respect of what is honorable and dishonorable, just and unjust, lawful or not lawful, whatever code of morality a city lays down for itself, believing it to be right, these things are so to it in reality. In these matters, one citizen is not wiser than another, nor one state than another state. But in enacting laws that are for or against its own interest, he will allow that the opinion of one state or of one advisor of the state is superior in respect of truth to that of another. For he will hardly venture to affirm that whatever laws a state may have enacted with the full belief that they are to its own advantage, they will also in the end prove to be such. But in the case of which I am speaking, in matters of justice or injustice, lawful and unlawful, men are prepared to insist that none of these has an inherent quality of its own by nature. They will not allow more than that what has been accepted by the state in common becomes true so soon as it shall have been so accepted, and so long as it may remain on the statutes. And even those who do not accept Protagoras' doctrine of measure take the above view of wisdom. But argument after argument seems coming upon us, Theodore, and a greater after a less.
Well, Socrates, we have leisure for it, I suppose.
It seems so. Indeed, I have often, my good sir, observed on other occasions, not less than now, how very naturally those who have spent much time in philosophic inquiries, when they come into law courts, appear ridiculous as orators.
In what sense do you say this?
It appears to me that those who have been conversant from their youth with law courts and assemblies of that kind, compared with those who have been educated in philosophy and kindred pursuits, have been brought up like slaves compared with free men.
In what respect?
Insofar as the latter, just as you remarked, always have leisure and hold their conversations at their own convenience and in peace. As we are now taking up one subject after another for the third time, so do your philosophers, if the new theme should please them better than the one proposed, as it has done in our case. Nor does it now concern them at all, whether they speak in brief or at length, if they do but get hold of the truth. Whereas your lawyers always speak under pressure of time. For the water, as it keeps running, does not allow them to loiter, and it is not in their power to make their addresses on any subject they may please. For the counsel, on the other side, stands there exercising a constraint over them in the shape of a brief which he reads as they speak, and beyond the limits of which they must not digress. His speeches are always about one who is as much a slave as himself, and are addressed to one seated there as lord and master, who holds justice in his hand. Nor do the pleadings ever digress into any other topic, but are confined always strictly to the legal question, albeit it is often a race for dear life. So that from all these causes, your lawyers become shrewd and sharp, well knowing how to flatter their master in word as well as how to gratify him in act, yet small and warped in their minds. For their growth in goodness, with their straightforwardness and freedom of character, has been taken from them by their having been slaves from their boyhood, which has constrained them to be always engaged in some crooked business or other, by burdening their yet tender minds with heavy loads of dangers and fears. Now, as they cannot bear such a load supported by justice and truth, they turn in quite early life to falsehood and to wronging each other, and thus in many respects become warped and stunted, and so turn out men from mere striplings without any sound principles in their minds, and very clever and wise they have become in their own opinions. So much then for the lawyers, Theodore. And now for those of our set. Do you propose that we should describe them fully or dismiss them for the present and resume our former subject, that we may not, as we said just now, make too free a use of our independence and our privilege of taking up one topic in place of another?
Not so, Socrates, on any account. Let us rather discuss their character in full. For as you very well observed, it is not that we, the acting party on these occasions, are the slaves of our subjects, but rather our subjects are, as it were, domestics, and each of them awaits our convenience for being brought to a conclusion, whenever it may seem good to us, for we have not in our company either any juryman or, as the poets have, any spectator standing by us to find fault or to call us to order.
Kwan,
Help!
shall we
Okay.
discuss to hear?
Yes. Well, I was waiting for another page, but that's okay too. Okay. So from page, I think that all of you noticed that the discussion about senses perception ended on page 55, and page 56 started the second part, okay, about what this translator called the true view. It could have been the true perspective or the true belief, okay? If you remember the 6 layers of the mind, sense of perception, I think that if we have to remember 2 major arguments that destroy completely the pretensions that sense of perception is equal to knowledge, is the one, if you equal sense of perception to knowledge, if you close your eyes, you don't have direct perception of the outside world, but you still have a representation in the mind. So just because of that, it's enough to destroy the argument that knowledge with the capital K is equal to senses perception. And is someone capable to give me the second big argument destroying completely that knowledge is equal to senses perception?
First one was obvious.
Well, that others are more informed or wiser about certain topics.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because if knowledge is equal to sense perception, and the Greek word for that is metron, that each man is the measure of his own truth, okay? That is the meaning of that, okay? Each man is the measure of his own truth, meaning pure subjectivity. How come that we would prefer certain doctors or certain pilots or certain architects? There must be differences from the one that we prefer, that we think that is superior in his art. So that is the second argument, major argument, common sense, destroying completely the idea that knowledge with the capital K is equal to senses perception. I think there are others arguments, but I consider them minor. Okay, that is for page 1 to page 55. Okay, so that is the first layer of semaion. Okay, so I said that the mind are made of 6 layers: vitality of the sense perception, intellect, psyche. So it's semaion 1, semaion 2, semaion 3. Okay, what's Plato called doxa, opinion, the animal kingdom. From page 55, he will deal with the idea of semaion 2, okay? That knowledge is true belief. And why do you think that he granted 3 pages from page 59 to page 58 to page 61 to lawyers? Why do you think so? Let's not forget, we are at semaion 2 now, okay? That knowledge is equal to intellect. And I would say that semaion 2 is very close to semaion 3, okay? Because let's not forget that semaion 3, the third line, the third layers of knowledge, is that it's the consensus of experts of your society, okay? But why does Plato, Socrates talk so much about lawyers to open that semaion, according to you? Because there are plenty of professions. Why the lawyers?
Well, lawyers are very prominent in our society,
Oh.
and they, to most people, they project a lot of respect among most of the people.
Okay. Are you,
But that
are you sure of
respect,
it? Are you sure of it, Stanley?
Oh no, I'm just
Okay.
what I'm saying. I'm just saying the common view, not my
They
personal.
make arguments.
Okay.
exactly,
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
not,
They have
not
been
common
heavily,
amongst my
Exactly.
I'm
circle.
sorry.
It's not a common view amongst my circle.
They make them
But
a
they
lot
have
money.
been very,
they have been.
okay, it's me, Susie. They have been heavily trained to win the argument. But everything that he said about them being enslaved to that role, they themselves have not become true. They have not grown in their epistemological growth. They have not become true. So it's that thing about what you're saying about this second level of the intellect. They have been trained to win the argument, but it's not truth.
Sophistry at
Exactly.
work.
Exactly. And there is a branch of sophistry in ancient Greece called heuristic, Eristic. Okay. And heuristic is the old name for lawyers because in that school, you learn to win at all costs. And it's not the truth that is important, it's the victory, okay, against your opponent. So, exactly, okay, he chose the lawyers because at the level of the intellect is your capacity to play with words, with concept, with images, to manipulate the emotions of your audience, which is important for the people prisoner at that level of the intellect. Okay, that's why he was talking also about slaves and about the fact that they have been slaves from their boyhood and that they are in reality imprisoned into that level of representation of semeion as conveyed by words, concept, and images.
Oh, can we hold there for a minute? That's a really important concept. And maybe if we can either even try to expound on that concept with more words to give it more of a picture. People that are trapped at that level of their intellect are swayed by those who basically bully you with a persuasive argument.
Exactly. And even not a persuasive argument. Let's say a capacity to spin images and concept and words, but not related to truth necessarily.
Wow.
What was that? Old name?
Wow.
What was that
Okay,
name you said for lawyers?
excuse me?
Heuristic? You
Heuristic.
mentioned.
Heuristic, Eristic. Okay. And it
Thank
was
you.
a school of argumentation for which the truth doesn't have any importance. The only thing that was important for those people was to win the argument at all costs. Okay, they were the ancestors of our present day lawyers.
Another thing in relation to the lawyers in that discussion was localization. That lawyers in one culture, of course, are dealing with the laws of that particular culture. But if you move somewhere else, let's say from Athens to Sparta or whatever, the lawyers are dealing with a slightly different set of laws, set of rules that are subjective to that community. So, they don't really represent anything in the way of objective truth. It's all very, very subjective and relative.
Yes. And I would like to come back to dialectical opposition between mutos and logos. Okay. And the line 2 of the intellect is archetypical of mutos. Okay. Because what does mutos mean? It means storytelling. Okay. So for the people at the level of the intellect, they are good storytellers. And by itself, the fact of being good storytellers is not bad. Okay, once again, I would like your guys always to remember that each layers of the mind, none of them is bad by itself, right? But if your capacity of storytelling is guided by evil intentions, then it can become a weapon for the bad rather than a weapon for higher epistemological growth or for the good.
Amazing.
Word. Yeah, that's good. I'm gonna be annoying. Just Quan, just because we've said in many different ways, the three forms of simian that we've heard in the simplest forms, because I just heard one. I heard you say just before the third was in terms of like the lawyerly arguments and whatnot, but then you referenced that the slave one was kind of about words and images, and then I kind of bugged a bit in terms of what the distinctions were. If you had to sum up the distinctions in
between two and three.
Yeah.
Okay, two is the intellect of the person, of an individual, and three is the consensus of the experts of a given society.
Consensus of the experts.
And the Greek word is pistis, P-I-S-T-I-S, and it means conventional truth or belief of a social belief.
Oh, that's what a pistis means?
Yes, and I think that it's very interesting, Dave, that you stress that, because there is a deep intimacy between Semaion 2 and Semaion 3, okay? Because if the child is guided in an appropriate manner, it's excellent that he is capable to be a good storyteller, that he can be, that he can have fun with concept and images and making associations between concept, images, and words. That is the what we all experienced when we were a kid. But when we were kids, but three is the game of the experts of your society, which impose their perspective, their view, as being the absolute truth rather than simply the conventional truth of that society. So that intimate relation between Semaion 2 and Semaion 3 is very important if the divine kingdom of Semaion 4, 5, 6, meaning beauty, goodness, and truth, are not activated.
And the simian 1
is sense of perception.
Okay, so words and images, sense perception. Okay, right. So one is just the raw. The other one is you start to play around with the images and the words attributed to the simian 1. You start to make it into new things. And the third one is the consensus built up on these things.
Exact. And here, if you don't have the divine kingdom, the transition between 2 and 3 is the origin of oligarchy. Okay, imagine a primitive society, a village of 500 people.
Yeah.
In those 500 people, you would have maybe 20 guys and women who are especially bright with Semaion 2. Okay, they are more capable to spin words and concept and images. If those 20 get together, they will impose the Semaion 2 to everyone, and that Semaion 2 becomes Semaion 3, pistis, consensus of experts. Okay, and that's the beginning.
Welcome,
and that's the beginning of oligarchy.
To our world. Welcome to our world.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that include the lawyers?
So, yeah, well, that's why Socrates chose the lawyers, because even 24 centuries ago, those people were already like what they are nowadays. Okay, it's an eternal race.
Right. Matt was actually, he mentioned, he was telling me something that interesting. Today, one of the interesting currents in the legal world is the shadow of a doubt, right? So that the lawyers become very good at crafting arguments, like weird arguments that, well, maybe, how do we know that this XYZ, you know, glove doesn't fit. You know, how do we know it's, you know, that maybe the rain shrunk the size of the thing, or, you know, all they have to do is create doubt. And if there's that doubt, even if it's like a clear-cut case, they win, right? Because it's not beyond a doubt. So that's, from what I understand, that's one of the popular tricks today. You know, you just got to create. So they're like weird arguments, you know, well, how do you know? And you can like gaslight people. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's totally
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Oh, I'm happy that you use the word gaslighting. Okay, because gaslighting is my favorite word for the people at Semion 3. Okay.
Right. It's their favorite.
The clever ones.
It's their favorite trick.
Yeah, the clever ones. Yeah. Okay. And the more you're good at storytelling, the more you will be good at gaslighting. But once again, no Semion is bad by itself. Okay. But it's not, if it's not guided by beauty, goodness, and truth, it can be a source of evil, of course.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's not a bad place. I mean, this is definitely a good place to
end for today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Page 63. I'll try and remember the number.
Yeah, page 63. Write it down. I'm writing it on my pen, so I remember.
Well, I mean, I got the invitation for today yesterday, and I actually thought it was going to happen yesterday too, until I realized, no, it's a day early. But it meant the invitation came with the link to last week's session.
Yeah, everybody's got the link.
Yeah, if that happens again next week, if that, you know, when I get it a day early or whatever, it's convenient to go back and have a bit of a, you know, watch of parts of it, even if it's just a summation as we're doing at the end here, Kwan.
Yeah,
it's good. If everyone can do that, that just puts you in the right frame of mind.
Cool. I see that Helen has her hands up. Did you want to say something, Helen?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that from reading these dialogues, it just seems to me that, you know, things are really just the same now as they were. I mean, I'm amazed. The more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess.
Yeah, history repeats itself. Yeah.
And even the sayings, like, you know, I know I have a little bit of a different translation. I have something from Britannic in here, but just the sayings, the expressions are just, I can't believe it's the same.
Huh.
That's all I wanted to say.
Well,
it's a fascinating aspect of it.
That's the eternal man, and that's the eternal animal kingdom.
As Heinrich Heine once said, "Es ist eine alte Geschichte, doch bleibt sie immer neu." It's an old story, yet ever young.
Absolutely, it's an old story. Okay, so thanks everyone. I'm hoping to see you next week, and thanks Dave for doing the excellent job you have done.
This was really fun, and thank you, Bruce.
I was just about to say,
I'm like a kid. I'm just listening to. I'm like a child. You know, I'm just listening, and I'm raptured by. I'm like, wow, Socrates was so funny. What a funny guy. Such a great guy.
Yeah, Bruce is doing an excellent job of reading.
Yeah, really bring that to life. Wonderful. So see everybody next week.
Okay.
Absolutely. Ciao.
It was good.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.